What's up, family? This is your boy, the author, coming right back up in that ass again, or right back at that ass again. Don't misunderstand. Here's another one. Happy New Year to everyone out there, man. Happy New Year. Hope you had a good time. This on New Year's Eve, I stayed in myself. I had a lot going on, so I pretty much took it easy, man. But that doesn't mean I'm not gonna celebrate with a little cornball, celebrate with a little something, something. That's right. I'm still celebrating by my lonesome. That's what's up. Still celebrating. Still celebrating. But be headed off to work tomorrow. But just want to make this quick video, man. Shout out to this kid, your man, my man. What's his name? I believe his name is Javin Bullets 3 on YouTube. He was discussing this topic, man, and I feel that it's a topic that's been circulating for quite some time now. This white guest had called into Tommy Soto Bichor's show, and they were talking about the slave trade. And almost every white person I talk to, they'll use this excuse as well, as far as don't blame white people for slavery. Blacks sold slaves to. You should be more angry at the blacks or at the Muslims than you are at the white people, because all they did was come over and they had guns. They asked for slaves. They made an equal trade. Then they went home, brought the slaves to Europe and the U.S. and built up their country and lived happily ever after, things of that nature. And this brother, he kind of, expounded on that. He pretty much addressed that topic and pretty much showed that it's bullshit. And I had some extra information as well, because listening to his video got me thinking about some of the books that I've read concerning this topic as well. And first and foremost, I'd like to say that from what I know, I went through school and I've done some independent research on the topic as well. I have a master's in literature, so I'm not just talking jail talk or prison talk. Not to say that everything is true, but some black power is going to say, well, the white man told you this, and the white man told you that. And then, pretty much when you get to college, they will give you more of that knowledge, because mostly, I guess they figure most of the people who actually get to college and make it through tends to be predominantly, Caucasian. I mean, you do have more other ethnic groups that are coming through right now, but they will tell you some of the, the reality of it, stuff that really happened. First and foremost, in terms of the slave trade, the British are pretty much the white or British colonialists, the white colonialists. They controlled slavery. They pretty much had the ships that they used for the transatlantic slave trade to transport slaves. But yes, they may have been others who gave slaves to the Europeans, but the Europeans controlled it. They had the biggest investment in it. I don't believe no one else had as many slave ships or had as many ships that were primarily used for taking cargo, i.e. slaves, back and forth across the ocean. The British East India Company had lots of ships dedicated to just that purpose. So the British and the Portuguese, they didn't just come to Africa for just to trade. The Pope had made a decree saying that it was okay, or saying that pretty much the primary mission of Europe was to, enslave Africans pretty much, and to take people. I mean, the Pope made this into law. And we all know that pretty much, our society is divided by church and state. And you almost see where the Pope almost gets more, he's no more than our president. So the Catholic Church has a tremendous amount of power. They did back then, and they still do now. So basically, with that being said, when the colonialists first came to Africa, they came through the Congo. A lot of they tried to, just aggressively take slaves, and it didn't work. A lot of Caucasians were killed because they tried to take the direct approach to get slaves. Just pretty much come up straight to the coast, kill, take what they can, and take as many slaves as they could, and then return back. That didn't work too well because the people obviously fought back. So, from my understanding, what was done then is that in Africa there were tribes. They don't like to be referred to as tribes. They like to be referred to as nations. Nations had debates within nations about religion, and some groups didn't want to go along with other groups. In terms of certain religions had sacrificial elements and components that turned other groups off. So they had a debate. They had debates and sometimes brutal warfare between the two groups. So the Portuguese, Europeans took advantage of this, and they came to society. They came to Africa as missionaries, and they began to, or they sent missionaries, Europe, and they began to build up churches in these African villages. Now, this was to give the Africans who didn't want to go along with the other traditions an alternate way to worship, because they knew that the region was a religious place, and these were religious people. So, in addition to that, first you had your churches, and everything was good. They learned the African languages, they learned the culture, they shook hands, they got to know them. But in addition to, they always had the underlining, they always had something else. That wasn't their initially what they wanted to do. They came with another idea. They had an underhanded alternative that they wanted to do. The churches were just the front. So what they did was they had the churches set up, but then they also knew that these nations were rivals. They were rival nations going at it through religion. So what they did was they brought a lot of guns as well in cargo. So they brought the guns. They I think in this video, this one, and I didn't. Now this part I wasn't aware of, the amount of guns. They said within a few centuries, the British brought about 20 million guns, handguns, firearms, and they shelled these out to the people. That way, because before that, if you fought against another group, it was pretty much with spears and things of that nature. We didn't really get too much into the firearms, but they gave them guns. Guns gave you a way to kill from a longer distance. You didn't have to be up close anymore. You could be out of range, and you can shoot your victim without even having to look that victim in the face. So they gave guns to people, and then they said, well, if you want to become a Christian or become a Catholic, other tribal or other nations are not going to like that. So you can become a Catholic, because a lot of people who were in Africa didn't like these missionaries built up, but some did. So they said, well, for those of you who hate the traditional way the Africans are doing things, now you want to become Catholics. The other nations are going to be angry at you. So what you can do to protect your way of life is carry a gun. And not only can you defend yourself, but if they don't have one, you can take them over. Okay. So, and then a lot of Europeans trained these Africans. And before then, if two villages went at it, you defeated the other village, but you didn't take the other village over as slaves. But Europeans trained these new Catholic and Baptist Africans to go on raids and to take over their enemy, conquer their enemies. So then if you had the guns, and if your other enemy didn't, you can take them over, you can kill them, you can take them captive. If you took them captive and gave them back to the British colonialists, then you were paid. You were paid money for it. So it was a very slick, sly, underhanded thing, because, like the guy said, British colonialists or the white colonialists realized very quickly that if there were, the more tension there were between rival groups, then the more slaves that would pretty much flow toward them. Meaning, if they can get the groups to fight each other, then they can pretty much just pick up the scraps. So what they couldn't do, what the British colonialists couldn't do directly by coming straight up the Congo and killing them and killing people and taking slaves, now they're able to come in as friends and get the other groups to fight each other. And then whoever, and pay different groups, okay, you kill them. If you bring these people to me, the ones that you conquer, you bring your enemy to me, as slaves, I'll pay you a certain amount for it. And that's pretty much, what happened. The same way as some of these colonialists came as friends to the Native Americans, handing them blankets. And then it looked nice on the surface, but those blankets had chicken pox and it killed them, and then they conquered them. Yeah, another underhanded type thing. So then they did that. And so he said, I think this professor from Brown, from this clip from Jabbing Bullets video, he says that the professor that's from Brown says that over a 2-year period, the British had given 20 million guns to the Africans, and in a 10-year period, they had given out 1.5 million guns just in a 10-year period. So I'm like, wow. So yeah, it's because they knew. So they pretty much they didn't just say, okay, if you can defend yourself, you black Catholics, you can defend yourself against other tribes. These people wanted to pretty much push on. They wanted to create conflict between the other groups. That way it would be better for them. Create conflict. That way, the more conflict that's created, the more villages and families that are broken apart, and then they reap the spoils of getting slaves. And then the same people who ended up working for them, some became slaves as well. And the ones that didn't become slaves, their offspring became slaves. So basically, that's how they took away so many people from the region. And they said the most valuable thing that was taken away from Africa, the most valuable resource taken away from Africa, wasn't the gold or the diamonds or the oil. The most valuable resource was its people. So they took so many people from that the missionary standpoint, from the churches and the guns. They took so many slaves from that conflict that it destabilized the region. I forgot how many millions that they took over the 3 or 4 centuries, but it destabilized the region. That's why Africa is the poorest continent now, with over 60% of it is impoverished. But it made sense to me, man, because I thought about it. And I said, well, so they gave them guns. And so they didn't just come over and say, let's trade. They actually came over, and it was a lot more in depth to that. They saw opportunity and they pretty much took it. They put the churches out there and put the guns. And that makes perfect sense. Just think about it. They put the churches up for these black people in Western Africa. And they say most of us are coming from Western Africa, which they say. So let's just pretend this is, and I'm not saying that, I don't know if all of us come from West Africa, but I do believe that this happened. Some of us do, and some of us come from other parts of the world, but I do believe that this happened. Okay, so they did bring the guns. They brought the churches first to gain the people's trust. And they brought the guns. Then they infiltrated the people by causing even more conflict so they can get slaves. Okay, so look at America now. Fast forward 4 centuries later, what's going on now? Okay, so we still have every black community has a church. The Baptist usually, and that's an offspring from Catholics and all that stuff like that. The Baptist church, and now there's gangs. Gangs have taken over the communities. Not as many families. Gang ties are stronger than family ties right now in the inner city. And how are these gangs getting guns so easily when black people, we don't own any gun shops? So someone is, just think about that. So basically, we don't own any gun shops. So how are these gangs these 9, 10, 11-year-old kids, where are they getting the guns? How are they even being able to afford the guns? So someone is giving them guns. So we have church, they have guns, the kids are killing each other. And the ones that survive end up going to prison, i.e. bondage, because in 1865, all the slaves were free, except for the ones who were incarcerated. So incarceration is another form of bondage. The U.S. has more people in prison than any other nation. 25% of its population is incarcerated. So they're still making money off of incarceration, and they're still using the guns, and they're still using the church on the black people. So they're using it and they cause dissension within the groups, not just within the gangs, which they created. Not just with the Bloods and the Crips, but the black Muslims, the Baptists, dissension in the ranks between in organizations, and they turn organizations against organizations. And then there's the conflict. When they see conflict in an organization, they feed on that, i.e. Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, i.e. Khalid Muhammad, and Louis Farrakhan, if you fast forward 30, 40 years later. So it just makes sense, man. It's like they're using the same tactics that they've always used. And I read this book too when I was in college by this author named Chinua Achebe. It's a Nigerian author. I think he wrote this book in 1958, but in that book, it's a novel. I think the main character is Okonoko, something like that. He was, excuse me, I think I messed his name up, but he was like one of the leaders in the villages, and he talked about in an indirect way they had the story was pretty much about. And I don't remember the whole thing, but from what I got from it back then, it's been about 10 years, but he was pretty much a leader in one of the villages, and he was talking about pretty much how, there were certain divisions between different nations on how to worship, because certain nations didn't want to go along with certain worship practices done by other nations or other tribes. And then he talks about the missionaries coming in, setting up the Catholic churches, which the character in the story, the main character, I'll call him O, the main character was against these missionaries setting up these churches, and all of a sudden, I think later on in the novel, people started capturing people. But he was talking about that in his novel back then, and that's pretty much the setup of how the whites or the Portuguese or whatever, how they actually came into Africa the second time, when they couldn't really get Africans the first time directly by trying to go straight to the continent and take them. It shows how they set up the missionaries. They set up the churches because they found out that the people were very spiritual. They studied the people, and they knew about them, and they knew they were very spiritual people. And they came at a time where the people were vulnerable, and they saw a break in one part of the region, and then they pretty much capitalized off of that by saying, okay, well, here are churches, we're going to help you guys out. And I don't know if the U.S., you could say that they probably do this abroad too, because they go to every region saying that they're going to help people. And there's still conflicts in different regions in the Middle East and things of that nature. But it makes sense, man. It's the same tools that they're using in their inner city. And some people talk about the U.S. creates proxy armies in different nations. So, and it's not like something that you can prove, but as far as, I can't point to it and say that they're doing it. But at the same time, this theology that they're talking about, it makes sense, man. It makes perfect sense. The guns, and especially works on black people, the religion first, then the guns will give you guns to protect yourself, and then the slavery. And they're still using those same three elements to control blacks here in the U.S. Most blacks in the inner city are what? Baptists. A lot of these kids in the inner city, AKs, guns. They got better guns than some of the people on the police force and people who are serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. How do they have better weapons than people in the U.S. Armed Forces? And blacks, we don't own any gun shops. And then the jails. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't, us as black people shouldn't take responsibility, and that we haven't, gotten lazy in terms of, just sitting back and being complacent and not organizing like we should. Yes, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Every race could use some work in some area. Not saying that other races at this point in time don't organize a bit better than we do, but it's just something to think about, man. It wasn't that simple where whites just came to, Africa and just wanted to trade and say, hey, we have guns. You guys have slaves already. Let's make a trade. It was nothing like that, man. And I'll put a link in the description box to this brother's, video where he talks about this. But I just wanted to expound or pretty much make an extension of maybe out of some of the stuff he may have left out. And because it just had my mind going like, okay, I remember this story. So whenever someone talks about, and like he said too as well, he said, people will never say the same thing about the Holocaust that they say about slavery. And in other words, first thing when you talk about African colonialism or slavery, average white person will say, well, blacks sold slaves too. But when it comes to the Jewish Holocaust, a lot of those Germans, the Gestapo, could have never picked up all of those Jews, without the help of other Jews. I repeat, I mean, the Germans had to have help to pick up all those Jews to take them to one place. They couldn't have done that just by themselves. But Jewish people don't say, oh, we should go after other Jews. We should blame other Jews before we blame the people who gassed us. They're the time, and a lot of those Jews were forced to get other Jews, or they were put in a situation where they were paid, they got monetary, advances to get other Jews. But now some of those Jews who were used to get other Jews, some of and bring those Jews to the gas chamber, some of those Jews were punished as well, but some of them weren't. And but a lot of them were, and it's the same tactic that they used on Africans, and the same tactics I think that are used, similar tactics to what's used now today with blacks. So but yeah, you can check out the video. I'll put the link in the description box. But I just thought it was a good topic to talk about. A great way to start off 2017. Family, take care, peace and love. Make sure to like and subscribe. See you on the other side.